President Joe Biden recently met with the head of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, to discuss how federal policies could help with bringing inflation down. And that's what we're going to cover in this video. So smash that like button and subscribe if you're new. You're watching More Money. Let's get it. What's up, guys, and welcome back to the channel, where the goal here is to help at least 1,000 people achieve financial independence much sooner. And let's dive right into it. So you can see here, President Biden and Federal Chairman Jerome Powell meet with inflation at its highest level in 40 years. And in fact, they didn't mention it in the headline, but you can see here on the right, that's actually Janet Yellen. So she was the former head of the Federal Reserve. So Biden didn't just meet with Jerome Powell, he also met with a former leader in Janet Yellen as well. And what is expected to come out of that is actually ahead of the meeting with Jerome Powell, President Biden laid out his platform to help combat high levels of inflation. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to go over that platform and see what sort of things he could do in addition to the Federal Reserve just increasing interest rates. That President Biden did say that the Federal Reserve has a primary responsibility to control inflation, and he agrees with their assessment that fighting inflation is their top economic challenge right now. But here's where things went a little bit awry. Biden said that we can't let up on our global effort to punish Mr. Putin for what he's done, which makes sense. I agree with that. And he went on to say that we must mitigate these effects for American consumers, which I also agree. Like, you want to punish these guys as much as possible, but at the same time, try and limit the impacts on American consumers. And sometimes those two come head to head with each other, but do the best that you can. Nobody's expecting you to be perfect right now. And so going back here, Biden proposed that Congress should help right away by passing clean energy tax credits and investments that he's proposed. Now, I don't actually know what that's going to do. On first glance, it doesn't look like it does anything to fight inflation as a whole. But if you guys know more about that, let me know in the comments. But to me, on first glance, it doesn't look like that does anything to fight inflation. And moving into here, here's where he really outlines his plans, and I sort of opine on each piece of it. So the first part is he wants to improve infrastructure, and that will sort of help address inflation. I don't understand how building bridges is going to help fight inflation. So that doesn't really make sense to me. But once again, I might just not understand what he's trying to say there. And so guys, if you guys understand it better, please let me know. The second thing that he's mentioning is that he wants to crack down on the fees that are being charged by foreign ocean freight carriers. But here's the problem. When you enter into price fixing, it just lowers supply generally. And so I think by price fixing, you're just going to worsen the supply chain issue and cause higher prices for consumers, and thus making inflation go even higher. So I don't see the link on how cracking down on these fees right now is going to help inflation over the long term. I think it just reduces supply. But once again, guys, let me know in the comments if I'm missing something here. The other thing he did say is that they want to build more than 1 million more homes, closing the housing shortfall in the next 5 years. And so my point here is that, have you looked at the numbers of homes that are being completed right now? I think the market is already sort of solving this. But here's the thing. Who are you going to build these homes for if people can't get mortgages to build homes? And do we really want the government to get involved in the home building process, because they could theoretically bring down the prices of building homes, which I don't think they can? I think it creates a bunch of other problems. And to be honest, one of the reasons why we ran into the mortgage crisis in 2008 and 2009 is because of policies set out to allow people who shouldn't have been able to afford homes become eligible to afford homes. And so do we really want the government involved once again with a heavy hand in the home industry? I'm not necessarily so keen on that. So I don't know how that's going to immediately impact inflation levels, but I also see a potential risk here to another housing collapse, or potential additional risk to a housing collapse if you get the federal government involved in home building. So I don't see how this works, but once again, I might be missing something. So let me know in the comments, guys. So moving back here, the next thing that he outlined is that he wants to give Medicare the power to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies and capping the cost of inflation. So I don't necessarily know how that reduces inflation overall. By capping the cost of insulin, I understand how that would reduce the cost of inflation for people who purchase insulin. I get that, and I think that that's a good thing. I think you guys might let me know further, but I think you guys pay a lot more for insulin in the States than people do outside of the States. So that's something that probably should get reined in. But I don't know how that overall reduces the level of inflation. And finally, he said that you can help lower the cost of child and elder care to help parents get back to work. But once again, I don't understand how that fights inflation. And in fact, how would you lower the cost of elder care or child care? I think the only way you can do that is by subsidizing the cost of child care and elder care. And in order to do that, you have to increase the national debt. And by increasing the national debt, you're increasing more money being put into the system. And so does that not increase inflation, not decrease inflation? At least inflationary impact. So once again, out of all of those points, I don't see anything that really helps fight inflation. Now, the other thing that I do want to point out, I think this is a little bit evil, because what he's doing is he's saying that about half of the reduction in the deficit is driven by an increase in revenue as his economic policies powered a rapid recovery. But here's the thing, taking credit for higher taxes being collected as a result of inflationary pressures, I think is evil. Also, I don't really know how that reduces inflation, because here's the thing, when prices go up, the sales taxes that you have to pay on those prices are automatically adjusted to inflation. So you're paying more sales taxes to buy those products. But also, as your wages go up, you get pushed into these higher wage brackets. And so that also increases the amount of taxes you have to pay. And so I don't know if it's right to take credit for the consumer having to pay more taxes to do the same job to purchase the same product. So I don't necessarily agree with taking credit for that. And I would say that that sort of like leans on sort of like the evil side. And you can see my point being made by the Wall Street Journal by looking at this article here. Federal revenues have surged this year, and individual income taxes as a share of economic output are reaching record highs. So once again, people are paying record high amounts of tax as a percentage of their income. So is that something that you should really be boasting about? And is that something that you should be really saying that that is a part of your policy? I'm not necessarily on board with that, because I don't believe that the average public person necessarily wants a politician to be campaigning on that. And so I think the real issue why inflation has sort of run away from us is because the Federal Reserve was just late on acting on it. I think that's really the case. I agree with Mohamed Ali Rand on this point, and you can see here that the Fed has been blamed by lawmakers and economists for failing to move faster to withdraw monetary stimulus. However, and I do make the point here that Powell did lose a lot of credibility, but I still think he's doing a job, and the messaging now is what I agree with, but being late has big consequences. But what I disagree with is lawmakers blaming the Federal Reserve for acting late on this, because I would suggest that lawmakers were very much on board with the Federal Reserve, because they didn't just act slow on increasing interest rates by accident. If you guys remember, late last year, there was a lot of political support being moved away from the Federal Reserve because of the reason why they were keeping interest rates low. And if you guys don't remember that, take a look at this article here. Political support was waning for the idea of letting the economy run hot for longer to close racial gaps. That's right. The policies were broad-based and inclusive, and the idea was that economic indicators such as black unemployment rates would now be incorporated into the assessment of whether or not the U.S. reached maximum employment, which was a prerequisite that Jerome Powell said for getting to start raising interest rates. Now, here's the problem. The Federal Reserve has two mandates. The first one is to maintain price level stability. The second one is to achieve full employment. I think those two run counter against each other, and I personally don't think that they should have that second mandate. I especially don't think that they should have that second mandate once they sort of broaden that mandate to start incorporating racial equity. And so I think that's the reason why they were late on it, and they were late on it by design. And so inevitably they did have to move against it, but they moved late, which is why they lost a lot of credibility by the market. But of course, they're inevitably now on our side, but because they moved late, they now have to act stronger. So where you would expect a 25% basis point increase or a 50% basis point increase, now they're doing 75 basis point increases in one shot just to catch up, which is wild. I think it's nuts that this is happening. And so you can see here that the Federal Reserve increased the funds rate by 75 basis points in their latest meeting to 1.5 to 1.75%. And now we have half the year left, and we will likely be at 3% or higher by end of year. And so there's a long way to go. Interest rates, or the federal fund rate, is expected to double by the end of the year. And so I do believe that that's going to cause further pain in the economy. But I also believe that there's going to be some stocks that are going to be sort of like that baby thrown out with the bathwater in this environment, which makes a lot of opportunity for value investors. And so you can see here that there's 11 companies that are now under 15% of their intrinsic value. And I show you two of them. You have Alibaba, which is trading at approximately 35% of their intrinsic value, and you have Zillow that's trading at approximately 40% of their intrinsic value. So there's a lot of opportunity in this market. And how do you get access to these models? Well, you can get access to these models that the Patreons get access to, and the tracker, and everything else that comes with the models at the lower tier of the Patreon level. And like I always say, there's never a risk to you, because if you try it out and you decide that it's not for you, no problem. Let me know in the Patreon app that you tried it and it wasn't for you, and I'll fully refund that first month's subscription so that you don't lose any money. Now, the other thing that you guys got to pay attention to is that there could potentially be a huge catalyst for Alibaba, where I actually believe that there's more evidence that the Ant Group IPO may proceed sooner than we think. And I dive into that video right here.